Oh, actually, we should be. Isn't that already starting time?
Yeah, we're at no? 1:30.
Yeah. Guys, I've I think we need to get started.
1:30.
Yeah. Starting time approaches. Okay, settle a little bit. Okay, thank you all for joining the SCITT BOF today. I'm Hannes. Next to me is Roman, our AD, who's responsible for this BOF. Elliot, as you can see, participates from remote, who is my co-chair. Hey, Elliot. He's going to post in the questions later on. We have two meeting minute takers, Paul and Alexei. And on the chat, we have Yogesh monitoring that one. And if there are any questions, bringing those to our attention. Okay. So since we are already several days into the meeting, I guess I don't need to repeat the note well, but here it is for those who are completely new. This is the agenda for today's meeting. First, obviously, I would like to welcome you. Then we talk, I give a few details on the background, the BOF goals, and also the interim BOF we had earlier, followed by a presentation about the problem statement. Bob is going to give that one. Cedric will speak about the architecture and the terminology. We have a short slot on clarifying questions related to those terms and architecture. And then we actually get into the meat of things, milestones, program of work, and of course the bigger discussion about all the questions that you guys may have. And finally, Roman and I will go through the usual BOF question to see whether there's interest to form a working group on this topic. Okay. Elliot, do you want to say a few words, introductory words about yourself as well?
I think you covered the ground really well already, Hannes, and I'll just add that I'm really excited about the BOF. I haven't seen so much energy behind the general concept in a long time, in terms of, you normally have 2 or 3 people who are really driving things. You guys, the people who have been involved in this even early on are really quite a large group of people. So there's a lot of interest here, and I'm sure we're going to do a lot of good work.
Thanks, Elliot. Okay, a few notes about the BOF we had. So mid of June, we scheduled an interim BOF, obviously online, and the usual material is available. I thought it was a good event. We had good participation, good discussions. Back then we got an agreement on a problem statement. We refined the problem statement later on a mailing list, which Bob is going to talk about to make it even crisper. But we also obviously had questions on the deliverables and of course discussions on the solutions, which then continued on the mailing list. I don't want to go into the solution discussions because it's a little bit premature, obviously, at this point in time, but it was good. It was good to hear that people are actually thinking about the various different ways of incorporating existing technologies. And at the end of the BOF, quite usually, we ask for the level of commitment in form of like who wants to review document, write document, but also who is committed to do some implementation work, knowing, of course, that we haven't seen the solution, so it's a little hard to exactly say what you're going to implement. But there was a lot of interest, and I was posted on a mailing list. I tried to capture this here. This is my sort of assessment on what falls into the software supply chain use case and into other use cases like that are more related to hardware. But overall, what you see, it's a lot of people responded to my email and expressed interest to do an implementation. But it also showed that even though we focused on the software supply chain use case, people have other use cases in mind too for that technology, which obviously quite important. And so we want to make sure that those are addressed as well. We don't want to leave interested parties behind. So we've been working on the problem statement on the mailing list, and we've seen sort of this tension between sort of writing the text of the problem statement as well as the charter in tailored to the software supply chain use case, and on the other hand, have a little bit more generic framing to cover also other use cases like hardware. By hardware, for example, I mean like a company like ARM produces software, low-level software, but then also obviously, as you know, has chips, and those matter in a supply chain use, or in a supply chain, in a generic supply chain use case as well. So what we have so far is, and you've seen this information in the material that was sent around to the list, and it's also included in, uploaded to the data tracker, that we have a proposed charter text, which has a generic framing, but it also talks about the software supply chain use case. And we have a charter, a problem statement that is tailored to the software supply chain use case. So keep that in mind. And as a goal, we obviously want to find out like what's the level of interest from the wider community here. And that's hopefully we'll find out in the end. So, okay, I have said enough, I think. And so I want to hand over to Bob to talk about the problem statement.
Okay, I have to bring this down a little bit from the Hanks
You can actually,
level.
it's probably better if you just rip it out and hold it in your hand.
Okay, so I'm Bob Martin. I work at the MITRE Corporation. This is my first IETF BOF, so be kind. What I want to share with you is the energy and excitement. We were talking about the discussion lists. How many here have actually seen some of the traffic on the discussion lists? Okay, well, hopefully I don't bore you with a little bit of recap, but basically, if we can go to the next slide. You know, supply chains, if you've thought about them, really are, you know, you're bringing together raw materials, you're putting them into intermediate goods and then delivering out to a customer and maybe at some point retiring it. That statement is really independent of what kind of thing you're creating, and that's our general use case. But to actually implement this, to actually show it works, we need to focus on something. And so we've chosen software because pretty much all kinds of organizations make use of software, either just software by itself in some cloud or software in a device controlling real interactions with the universe, as it were. So, you know, think about what we're trying to do is just like a notary. You know, we're trying to have a service, a capability that can witness you making statements or something making statements. We're not really caring what the statement's about, just that it's really you or really the thing that did it and when they did it. So that's kind of our generic, our you know, broad application, but we want to focus on the software because it's a clear and very dire problem right now. And we think it will actually flex through the different scenarios we need. And that's pretty much what I had as a prepared discussion. Glad to have people have things that they'd like to know more about the problem statement.
Is that a clarifying question, Eka?
Sorry.
There
you go.
I was going to encourage you to say a few more words connecting the notary function to the software supply chain integrity function. How do those, like, can you just like draw the whole
Okay,
connection top to bottom?
so if you think about it, and we'll focus on the software scenario for this example. Basically, one of the first things someone may want to record is, here are the components in the software that I am creating. So that's a bill of material of some sort. And so they could say, okay, have this witnessed and have evidence that it actually was created at a certain time and it's, noted. Now, I may also want to say that it was built using the following tools and the following configurations. It was witnessed by the following people. All these statements would be go through the notary and be recorded. The notary actually doesn't care what those statements are, but we do to solve the, kind of things like solar winds or so on. So the idea here is that if you've done things to show the process, show the assurance gaining activities done on that software, that you can bring them in. And also you can have somebody independently, third party, come in and endorse those, that yes, I physically was there, I looked at the logs, and so it doesn't have to just be from the organization that's making first party claims, as it were.
Guys, the queue is actually not open yet because there's a separate slot on the agenda for the clarifying questions. Actually, after the next presentation, because there we talk about the terminology and the architecture.
Yeah.
I think that fits nicely
Yeah,
into
that
the
will
problem
be-
statement.
If you have questions about the problem statement, things that I kind of glossed over in my excitement.
Cool. Eka, did that give me a show of hand if that sort of clarified things for you a little bit?
Mostly, but I think I'm still like, I do understand it from external reasons, but like I still don't quite understand what the notary is doing there, which is to say that like,
Well, think
like there's like the concept that, like there's a difference between I witnessed you doing some specific thing and what the notary in this case is doing is saying, you said something or other, which I haven't looked at, but I promise you did it this time. And so I think I'm just hoping you can draw
so.
the connection.
Think about.
Actually, before you
Okay,
answer, I
sorry.
think that's actually part of the next presentation. That's why I scheduled the clarifying questions right afterwards, because but it's a good point. Keep that in mind, Cedric. And also, I hope for those who haven't been on the list, since you haven't seen that, it's a fairly short problem statement, and probably the software use case is something that many of you sort of easily relate to because you're working on software yourself. You've witnessed some of the attacks, and so having what is said here, more visibility into the whole process, into the process, how the different components relate to each other, who produced what, is obviously quite important to accomplish accountability. Okay.
So I think my comments are directly related to this slide, and
but I still would like to follow my
Okay,
my
I'll
order.
come back.
But you are not thrown off the queue, Michael. So everything is great.
I'll come back in the queue at the time.
No, you stay on the queue. So that's good.
Yeah, just one little aside. So if you think about a notary in the real world, that they can, witness a contract, they can witness your signing something, they can witness anything you want. And basically they're attesting that, it's you doing that action. They aren't investigating the validity of that thing. And so that's part of the model you want to think about, I think. So
Good. Okay. Cedric.
While we're teeing up the next speaker, just as an audio video, is anyone else having trouble hearing based on the audio from the other room? Because I don't know whether it is. Okay, so let me go ask them to turn that gain down there.
Hello. Okay. Yeah. So thanks. So I'm Cedric Fournet from Microsoft, and yeah, I'm going to give you an idea of what we have in the initial draft architecture for SCITT. And in particular, I have one slide explaining what we think are the additional security properties of that we get through the Notary or the transparency service. So let's start with a bit of terminology. So the core notion for what we do is the claim. So that's terminology that is specific in the context and that is detailed in the draft. But so a claim is any statement made by the issuer about an artifact. So that's quite generic intentionally. So we want the issuer to be identifiable and we want the statement to be non-repudiable. So in practice, it means the issuer will sign the statement with the key associated with their identity. So the core role of SCITT is the notary or the transparency service. And the role of the notary is to take claims, signed claims that are presented to it, and then apply its designated registration policy. And if the claim matches the registration policy, to register that claim into a transparency registry that it maintains, and to issue a receipt that proves that this claim has been inserted at a given position in the receipt. So getting in more details, the registration policy will involve checking the identity and checking that the claim has been correctly signed. And it might also involve access control and also some optional features like checking for secure version numbers in case you have multiple claims about the same artifact issued by the same entity. The notary, once it checks that the registration policy passes, adds the claim to this data structure, so the transparency registry. So it's a verifiable data structure that crucially is append only. So the notary can add stuff to it, but it cannot remove or edit or rely on what has been recorded in the past. I want to point out that transparency is for the consistency of what's in the registry. It doesn't mean that everyone will have full access to the registry. That's something that is a matter of local implementation decisions for the notary. Finally, the main notion and the cryptographic evidence provided of insertion in the ledger is what we name receipt here. So a receipt is an online universally verifiable proof that a claim has been inserted in the registry. So because the registry is append only, receipts do not expire, but of course it's possible to append new entries that assume the older claims and also to issue a new receipt. So once the receipt has been produced, that receipt can be attached to the signed claim, and that what we get is a transparent signed claim, which is a unit of distribution to relaying parties, verifiers, and auditors that can check that it has been properly signed by the issuer and properly countersigned by the notary that provided the receipt of registration. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we go with security properties. So you may ask what we gain by having this notary intermediary. And here we have to manage expectations. So there is no way we can say whether a piece of software is good or bad, or whether something, that a claim that is made is malicious or in good faith. The only thing we propose to do here is to keep track of what's going on in a uniform manner so that everyone gets to see the same transparent claims registered onto the ledger. And so by maintaining this shared authenticated data structure in the which is a transparency registry, we provide the guarantee that everyone talks about the same claims, talking about the same artifacts. So when they can refer to it, they can endorse it, maybe they can invalidate it, like report a bug or vulnerability on it. But at least there is a common ground for referencing the claims and their issuers. Quite importantly, it also provides a strong disincentive for reputable actors to issue dubious claims because they will be held accountable for any claim that they do and that is made transparent in the register. Finally, and more specifically, having this registry guarantees that it's not possible for different relaying parties to be presented with different claims or different artifacts for the same objects. And it's very important to exclude classes of attacks that would target particular relaying parties as opposed to others, so trying to avoid detection. So there is a price to pay for that, and which is that for all consumers or claims like verifiers, auditor, or hearing parties, we accept them to check first before they do anything else with the claim that the claim has been properly registered in the designated at the designated notary, and for that they will check the counter signature, the proof of inclusion, the receipt, to make sure that they are talking about something that is properly registered before making any decisions and looking at its content and deciding what to do with the artifact. Okay, next slide, please. So there is quite a lot of related work in this area. So in particular, there are many transparency mechanisms and services that have been deployed typically for specific use cases or applications. So the most famous is probably certificate transparency, that it tends to keep a global registry of all XR9 certificates being used in practice for TLS authentication, at least on the server side. There are also a lot of interesting work on software specifically, looking at software bill of materials, or to understand their content, or to have what format they should be using, and also how to systematically register any software package or software binaries that get released by trusted entities. Finally, there is a lot of work on the applied cryptographic side on techniques to issue what we call here receipts, those offline universally verifiable proof of inclusion in the register using Merkle trees or more advanced cryptographic constructions. Next slide. So this is my final slide. So it summarizes the architecture that we have. So we have essentially three roles. So we have the issuer, we have the transparency service, or notary for short, and then we have verifiers and auditors. So the flow goes start from the issuer, who decides to make a claim about a given artifact. So the issuer selects the statements, then it provides an envelope that contains headers that are going to be interpreted by the transparency service, and that includes its identity, its choice of cryptographic algorithms, and may also include additional parameters to be passed to the registration policy enforced by the notary. So the issuer then signs the envelope containing the statement with a key associated with the identifier put in the envelope of the claim, and then the issuer or anyone else can present that claim, that signed claim for inclusion in at the transparency service. So transparency service will apply its designated registration policy, then insert in the authenticated data structure, that is the registry, then produce that receipt and return it so that it can be attached to the claim and distributed to any parties who may rely about that claim and its content. So from that point on, the verifier should of course check that whatever claim they accept has been properly registered, so that it is transparent. And more advanced security checks are doable for auditors that may be able to collect a large collection of receipts and check for their consistency, and even go to the registry and replay the registration and of what has been what has been accepted by the transparency service, and also independently look at the actual content of the payload of those statements to look, for example, for defects in the software that has been registered to the system. So that's all I have. If you have clarifying questions or comments on that.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Michael, do you want to put yourself onto the queue again, or? Okay, are you on the queue? No. Okay, go. So here's the spot where we want to talk about clarifying questions.
Paul Wouters. Just a remark on this presentation on the previous slide. Maybe it's one more slide back. Yeah, no, this one. We did actually in the transparency working group also do a little bit of work on this. We tried to do binary transparency for firmware images work. So I don't think it went very far, and there wasn't really consensus on doing it the way it was described. But I just wanted to make sure that we're aware of that it has happened, and people might want to just have a quick look at it.
Yeah, Paul, that's a good comment. And clearly, like for anyone who knows the certificate transparency work, this is obviously it's essentially a generalized version of that, what we are talking about here. So the problem with a BOF is always you have to use some terminology, and while once the working group in a later stage is formed, you will actually then agree on that terminology. So you have to pick something first, and then of course not everyone agrees. So it's always a little bit of chicken and egg problem. But I hope you sort of get the basic ideas also with the help of the diagram. So I had a couple of lots of other people in the queue, but they don't. Do they want to go to the microphone? Where's Dick? Dick was first. Eckert, you were next. But keep those to the. But guys, keep those to the clarifying questions, because we have a like 50-minute slot afterwards after Hank's presentation on the program of work. So.
Thank you, Cedric. My name is Dick Brooks. I'm here from Reliable Energy Analytics, and our company has been in this software supply chain risk assessment area since 2018. And I'm here because you guys have a very important task ahead of you. People are relying on digital signatures today to prove who the software supplier is for many of the signed software products. And the problem is that there's really no verifiable way to say this party was authorized to sign on behalf of this supplier. And so I did a little experiment to prove this to my friends in the energy industry. I took the Java, one of the Java distributions, a JVM. It was signed by Oracle. And I went ahead and I signed it with REA's signing key. And when I showed the people at NERC that I was able to overcome or take over the Java distribution and claim that I was the supplier by virtue of the key, they were really kind of surprised. But that's the problem we have right now, that we need some way from the supply chain side to verify these relationships that Microsoft, has authorized Dick Brooks or REA to sign on their behalf, but we need a way to verify those relationships. And that's what I think the opportunity is today.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, try to make sure that you focus on clarifying questions related to the previous text that was presented. Ecker.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at this, and I guess my question is, can you talk about the relationship between this work and SigStore, so that we can have like a context for, where the whole ecosystem lives a little bit?
Sure, yes. Maybe Roy, you want to address that one? Or? Okay.
So I wanted to address the previous question from Eric and this one.
Close to the microphone.
I said I can address the previous question from Ecker and this one as well. So my name is Roy Williams. In the case of the notary, we have an opportunity to potentially extend notarization of claims that last longer than the certificates that they're signed with. Microsoft has done this in the past with Authenticode, and it's been a complex problem for us for many years, and it doesn't scale. So we're looking at a simpler solution. The notary concepts here allow us to basically say, hey, the trusted roots for the identities of the people making endorsements or claims can be configured at the server end, and I don't have to replicate out CA roots out to a million to a billion people. That's an opportunity that comes with the notary here, and potentially a lot of reduction due to what is perceived as a reduced set of SCITT services. Now to Eric's last question, which is SigStore. SigStore currently, the OpenSSF project is multiples of theirs. Salsa, SigStore, JFrog is putting Persia in there, and so forth. In the case of SigStore, They're currently at the point where they're offering a free, simple way to not have to deal with PKI by issuing certificates at a very short timeline. So there's no curls or no OCSP, and you're relying on logging to come back to proof of token. In this model, SigStore would end up generating the content that would be shipped up to a SCITT instance, which the notary would then validate and then record it when it happened and put it on the ledger. So they kind of plug into one another. In the case of Salsa, they're making claims and content that somebody's going to sign and also then submit to the SCITT store. So they don't overlap. They actually complement each other and plug into one another. Now, who's to say, you know, as SigStore, the open source project grows into this, whether there'll be more overlap, but at the moment they just plug into one another.
So can I add a couple of words?
Let me, if
Okay.
possible, like we have a few people still in the queue. Michael?
Okay.
Hi, Michael Richardson. So this is my problem was with the first slide where it said that our use case was software SBOM things. We're all really good at that, and here's a good example of, you know, the things. There's several different efforts in SBOMs, and I'm not saying they're bad or unnecessary. I actually think they're really important and really necessary. Okay, I'm not actually sure what the IETF as a network focused thing brings to those other efforts. Okay, in particular, my concern is that with respect to the people from Microsoft, I'm sure you can make anything fly at scale, at large scale. The question is, you know, can you make it work for left pad, right? And that's the real question. Can you make it work for physical devices? So my feedback is, of course, let's deal with the software bill of materials problem, okay? But I think we need a second use case, which is in the physical world, and which explains to people outside the IETF why it is that we're involved in this process. Well, it's probably because these claims need to be transmitted over the internet and probably have to have anchors that, trust anchors that are lookupable on the internet with some authorization. But to do that, I think we have to go a little bit out of our comfort zone. And we're actually going to have, we need to pick an available other thing. Maybe Dick here can bring us the energy sector of physical devices in that sector. If so, great. But I'm not, I don't want us to focus on just, you know, left pad and the latest OpenSSL distro. We need to go beyond that point. Otherwise, I think that we'll wind up with a standard that's great for us, but nobody else uses. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think, Michael, you indeed support the current approach to the charter that we have taken, and that's actually good. We saw that tension on the mailing list. Some of the folks, and as I tried to show on this slide, some folks coming more from the software supply chain side, others coming from sort of other industries, other verticals, which is quite understandable because hardware and software in the bigger scale of things often very much relate to each other, and there's more. But point taken. That's I have to cut the queue here, to be honest, because otherwise we are not getting to the actual discussion point. So Rüdiger, where are you?
Rüdiger Volk. I'm not completely sure whether I'm right here. From my experience, I'm coming to the question. Yes, it's really good to have such bill of material and so on. What I wonder is the question of how to bind the actual deliverable and the, say, bill of materials that we are talking about, so that one can actually check as a recipient of the stuff that they are actually linked in some way. Like in software, quite easily is the intention of having one of the transactions in the bill saying the last party dealing with the stuff takes a checksum and puts in the statement, the checksum of this deliverable is, and well, okay, that might be a thing for the physical objects that were just mentioned. Obviously, that would not directly help.
May I comment briefly?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
If you can. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's a very interesting point. And there was also an earlier question about authorization policies, and I think that's how to know this is this person is authorized to make those claims. So I agree. These are very important points. The approach we are taking here is to guarantee that we can deliver transparent signed claims as the input of local authorization policies. And so we know there is a lot of work on the authorization policy before you make the decision whether or not to accept an artifact as valid. And we think there is value in providing binding from the claims that are the input of that policy back to the long-term identity of people that are trustworthy, because if they are long-term, they can be hardwired into the policy. And the policy can be checked automatically as opposed to rely on people to inspect and be subject to typos or this kind of thing. So yes, there is a very big part for the authorization policy that can be fed those claims after we have checked that they are signed and transparent. But we try to put that out of scope for the working group, where we just essentially make sure we can automatically provide systematically the guarantee that the claims have been validated and registered without directly looking at the content, which is interesting, but much more open and complicated.
Eka, and I want to note, like, please wear your mask if you don't do it yet. I've seen a couple of people.
Not to worry, I have it.
I know.
So I'm sorry to keep pushing on this, but I just didn't quite understand your answer, right? Like, I looked at Sigstore and they clearly have a transparency log where they plan to, and there's already a BT log at Google. And so what I'm trying to understand is, are we at IETF proposing to standardize something that will be in competition with existing working BT logs? And if the answer is yes, then I'm concerned. If the answer is no, because they're going to like pick up whatever this is, then fantastic. So like, I'm in favor of this area of work, but I'm trying to figure out where, like, are we being asked to spin up competitive work, or are we being asked to spin up collaborative work? And so like, I'd love to hear from like them actually, but if I hear from you, that's a start, right?
So.
So this is Roy Williams. At the OpenSS meeting, this basically came up. The people with the most experience there were the Cloudflare people that have done CT logging for the last little while. They did not want to continue down this experiment. They said this has been super problematic for us, and we've been in talks with them to see what we could do to improve it. We're willing to work with them to try and come up with a better solution, but right now they're saying the CT logging as it exists today that they're offering is not scalable when they grow out. So Sigstore, as what they're attempting to, we basically are willing them to work with us, and we've invited them to the meetings and so forth. So yeah, there's a concept of auditing, but right now the people that are contributing to the Sigstore OpenSSF project are saying, hey, they see some roadblocks ahead for what they have.
Brendan, please go ahead.
Hi, so I'm in favor of this work. I think it's a really interesting area for us to pursue, and I think there's some real gains that we can get out of it. The problem that I have so far is that I've read through the charter, and all of it seems to hint at some very specific security problems that we're trying to fix. The problem is those aren't written down. So I've got a problem statement that has no specific threats listed. I have no idea exactly which threats we're trying to mitigate, and all of that leads to a lot of confusion in these discussions. So what I'm hoping is that somewhere I've missed a list of threats, and I'm hoping that you can tell me where to find that so that I can go through this.
Yeah, if you can look at the draft architecture that describes the motivation, the attacks, and some of the proposed implementation to actually achieve those properties. So I think the architecture, of course, is just a starting point, but I think it's already workable, and we also have prototype implementations that are close to providing those guarantees with what we think is a proper security model for them.
Okay,
but
thank
the
you.
architecture is a good starting point for that. Then there are some threads on the mailing list as well discussing it.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Elliot?
Okay, so I just have a quick clarifying point to Michael, who suggests we need a second use case. Yeah, we have a lot of people in this room who haven't, virtually speaking, in fact, who haven't participated in IETF. When we received guidance that we should narrow our use case down to supply chain, but that was really from the AD and others who said keep it small first. So all I'm just going to say is please let's not penalize the people who are designing who came up with the spec for the narrow focus. That was really the IETF own goal. If you have any concerns.
Okay. Thanks, Elliot. Good. So let me move on to the next presenter. Who is that good for you, Hank? No. No, that's fine. No, okay, we didn't.
Maybe I am just confused. So, hi, this is Hank. So I'm going to talk about the essence of this, which we boil down to the milestones, which of course are too abstract. And so we are going into the content that can be the charter at some point, and that's we call the program of work. Next slide, please. So, I have a monitor here. So yeah, Brandon said the obvious thing, where's the threat model? It's going to be a hard one because we have to first understand the building that is on fire. And then now we have to understand how to rescue people from the building if it is on fire. So the threat model will be part of the architecture, and it is outlined there a little bit, but that is a milestone. So the milestone is the things we are talking about terminology-wise. I'm going to go to my standard example that I heard somewhere a few years ago. If you want to buy a house, you probably really have to know who's the buyer, who's the seller, who's the bank, and who's the notary. If you confuse these roles, you pretty much are not buying a house. And so we are trying to secure supply chain for software here. And therefore, I think an architecture and defining these roles with precise terminology is important. I'm going there later. Information models and interaction models are important, of course, because we want to have protocols in these have to interact sometimes. We have a very specific one in COSI right now because we want to have this proof that this happened. People were telling about us, this transaction really happened. The statement was made a transparent claim. You've heard that before. And we have an ongoing COSI independent ID that's talking about these additions to counter-signing, especially using COSI. So there's something happening there. You can look at it. There's something tangible here. So these are potential milestones. All this is draft. Everything here should be like proposed milestones or proposed draft or proposed architecture because this is above. Okay, I hope this is implied. So the proposed way to do a protocol here, of course, is then using something like an HTTP-based REST API. And request response is just one interaction model, right? You can have a lot of these, but this is very tangible. Everybody, I think, gets request response. So these are potential milestones that could end up at the bottom of a data tracker. But now go into the details. So I spoiled it all. Now let's dissect it a little bit. On the following slides, we will talk about this so-called program of work, which is, I think, the frame in which we will allow deliverables and milestones. And so I think that will become part of the charter at some point if we go to chartering. And again, there's this architectural model that was talking about banks and issuer and buyers and such. These are the actors, and they somehow interact with each other. This has to be written down somewhere. It is not necessary to build a system that functions. This document here, this architectural model, but if you really want to build it in a way that does the things that it's intended to do and nothing else, I think you really need the definition of interactions, terminology for and interactions. And Brandon's point of view, I want to add this to the architecture, a threat model to some extent. because that is really tied into the information model, interaction model in the end, and the consister actor identification is key. I trust a transparency ledger. It gives me a transparent claim or just a receipt of it. That's a trust relationship. I have to identify the issuer of this contract signature. I have to identify the issuer of the initial statement. And that has to be consistent. That has to be consistent all over the supply chain. I think that is an essential part of all of this. And I'm going into much details because this is an overview slide. So let's go to the next ones because I would go deep in here. Yeah. So essentially, the issuer is key. The issuer needs a low threshold way to make a statement. It can't be confusing. I must be working my app. If I take a photo and post it to the transparent registry, it must be really easy. Click, done, send. I have key material and such. So the issuer is, of course, not always me making a photo. So picture didn't happen is not really our scenario here. But sorry. The important part is that the re-identification is a very hard problem. We have PKX, we have other things out in the world that might last longer than a certificate and it's tied to PKX. And I heard before on the mic that these assertions have to be audible for a long, long time. These things will be, I don't know, embedded in a highway for a long, long time. You can't just break them out or update them, that's done. So I think these audibility features are somewhat ingrained into this architectural model, and therefore it will provide a lot of examples how to compose these roles and compose these actors. Next slide, please. Yeah, I was basically, damn it. I was talking about this lofty slide. Again, re-identification of all the parties, essential way. It has to be some decisions on the format, some decisions on how to manage them, and some decisions on how people are happy with it. Are you happy with the way we are doing it this? That's working group work. That's why this slide has no indication of whatsoever what we want to do here with the actual solution, because it's just consistent actor identification. That's the problem. And everybody can agree on this. We can have rough consensus on this. There are a lot of things on the table. And I think that is something that is really IETF working group work, because the experts are all here. We can also invite other experts. And I think some of them are already here. So I think this is a very inspiring slide, therefore. Next slide. We heard about notarization. I'm going with the second one first. It's like a real life notary. It does nothing else. You go somewhere, you conduct some things, and it's getting notarized by a trusted party. So these SCITT services, however we want to call them in the end, this transparent registry, whatever, it's also a lower term. These things can scale in any system, in any instantiation around the globe, however you want it. If you're a global manufacturer for software that everybody wants to audit, be global accessible. If you're really confidential, your notary is only accessible for a few select people, like really select people. It's just the, I don't know, RAN of a certain carrier in a certain cell phone thingy, right? It can be scaled as much as you want. But the important part is, if suddenly your supply chain changes, someone else is coming in, someone else is moving out, it has to be interoperable. And that is why we need this authenticity layer of that really happened, because auditing otherwise is a nightmare. I don't know who here is actually an auditor and has tried to do a supply chain transition from one authority to the other, but it is a legal and it is a documentation nightmare. And we can't really solve the legal nightmare, but we can solve the audibility and the accountability nightmare a little bit for them and on a technical level.
Thank you. You need to cut it short. You still have 2 more slides.
Yeah, I have 1 minute and 50 seconds. Go ahead. I have a clock there. So I've been already talking about our work at COSI. And so I'm very encouraged by the feedback, which seems to be this is an unobjectable content to the, or addition to the COSI realm, which I'm happy to hear. Again, we are not inventing new wheels here. We are literally adding some spikes to the wheels so it gets mounted up better. So we are using existing IETF technology for this countersigning apparently. And so next slide, please. And this is the one I'm not absolutely sure about. So some people told us it's okay to do APIs in the IETF. I was a little bit surprised. Yeah, we can do some protocol binding here because you would have to find things in there. Query response, apparently, you want to find the responsible issue of one feed, of one issue of software, and then if the authority really changes or if some other entity is endorsing it, you also want to find that. So I think a protocol really helps here, understanding the general operations that you want to support. Let's come over with the interactions. My slides are gone. I still have 30 seconds left. Oh, okay. Yeah. But we can take questions now.
No, you can continue. It's just I lost internet connectivity.
Oh, it's not me. It's you. Okay. That's unusual.
It's not a sabotage, Hank.
Sure. Let's start at the beginning. So we're doing skill. No, okay. I mean, really, we are coming from the IETF point of view. Having a reference protocol helps understanding what the operations are. Again, binds it all together. Information model, interaction model, architecture roles. A reference protocol would really help here, I think. And it also doesn't hurt. If you're starting from zero, it's fine to have one. If you're already involved heavily in your own thing, get our cool building blocks because we are not providing systems. And so, yeah, that's basically my comment on the protocol bindings, and I'm perfect on time.
Excellent. Thank you, Hank. So
I will yield the mic for the discussion, but it will come back to any of these mics for discussion. So don't think that I'm leaving the room or something.
In short, 4 items to be worked on, 4 documents, specific documents, nothing that should probably surprise you having worked in the IETF before. Discussion time. I see the first person, Nalini.
Yeah, Nalini Elkins. Maybe this is not the right time for this. I'm just trying to put this into context. So I'm not clear how you become a notary and whether this also applies to open source software as well as, something produced by a for-profit company. Or I don't know if you're going to get to that or what.
No, that's the microphone.
So this is Hank. The basis for this is we have a code base. We have apparently signing is involved somehow, right? So the code base we're doing here is as a reference where we are starting with this is cozy. And all of this is going to be not very open source, but also very code reviewed. And this does not stop with the single libraries. It goes on with interoperability between libraries and a matrix automatics that shows you which library is interoperable with which in your supply chain, so we can recommend something here. There's a hard basis for decision actually. And then a reference notary is planned as an open source project also. So you can't just go with just do this. Yes, a open source and free available and easy licensable framework is on the roadmap and very, very close. And we can, if we look at the, I think it's ARMS, Go Cozy, you can see how we really mean this, because there's a report folder in there that includes 2 code reviews. And that's the basis we basically aspire to be really reliable on the grassroots code here.
Cedric?
Yes, so I have a complementary answer to this question. So something I failed to mention in the architecture is that we do not presume there will be a centralized notary for everyone. And so quite crucially, you want to have interoperability. And so it's completely all right to have multiple notaries, multiple services that are trusted by different people for different reasons. So now the more it is open source and the more there is a reference implementations and the more guarantees you can provide, such as running with adequate replications or with additional independent auditing or with trusted hardware. The more trustworthy it will be and the more likely it will be trusted by more people. But we don't want to prescribe that. So we hope there will be a healthy diversity of notary services for different purposes. And in fact, for some of the use cases, it makes sense to have a dedicated service. Like if you look at the use cases that we described last time, there is confidential computing. And for that, in order to be able to say good things about the binaries that we trust, for attestation, having a dedicated notary service makes a lot of sense. Similarly, the same claims can be registered on multiple notaries for different purposes, and that's also something that we think should naturally occur with multiple notaries.
Monty?
Yeah. Monty Wiseman. Regarding the scope, I'd like, I see a lot of parallels going even further down the stack than just software. The software runs on a machine, you've got firmware, you've got hardware. And I see this applicable not just to the software supply chain, but also the hardware and firmware supply chain. So I think I would like to see, I think this is a great solution for that. We've got platform certificates out there, people producing basically certificates that said that machine came from XYZ manufacturer. We don't have a way to distribute them right now. I think this is a phenomenal way to get that, as well as reference measurements for firmware and things like that. Firmware is really just software. And the platform itself, kind of emphasizing this, is also comprised of many components. Inside each one of your machines, you probably have a half dozen microcontrollers. All of them have firmware that's updatable. So I guess I could see the scope of this expanding to further down the stack as well. I don't see anything different that I would do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One a question back. If you look at the current charter text, do you see like it has been written in a slightly more generic way? Do you think that charter would cover sort of like the space, the use cases that you have in mind, like with software, firmware, hardware?
I think the literal wording right now, someone would say hardware, shipping a platform certificate describing the hardware might be out of scope.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it requires a lot of tweaks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But again, we as a group need to decide, is that in scope? Is it simply the software that's running the operating system above, or does it also include the stuff below? If it's not, then I think we need to start up another group for that. I'd like to see it all in one, because I don't see the problem statement being a lot different between the two.
Okay.
So
just being explicit.
Can I get a comment in there? I think the important part, the working group is, or the proposed working group here, is intended to use software transparency as a first use case. It's not intended to be circumscribed to just software transparency, though. And so maybe the thing we need to do is, Monty, is as we're going through the work of the working group, assuming that it gets chartered, that you should probably have that hardware use case at least in your hip pocket, and maybe we should talk with the area directors and say, well, maybe we do adopt it as a draft if it's available. But the risk of that, and this is where I think Roman might want to comment, is that people become unfocused if you diverge too far. So there's a bit of a tension there, and I just want to highlight that I don't think we want to be too narrow, but at the same time, we don't want to be so general that we're not useful for anything.
Yeah. So I agree. There's going to be some balance. You don't want to lose focus. You have a really good thing to do here, but at the same time, I don't want to reinvent the wheel over in another working group, right? So, if we can make it general enough, that would be great. And we could just tweak it a little bit. But I'd be more than happy to participate in writing use cases and helping with the charter if we need to word with that charter. More than happy to help with that.
Thanks, Monty. And Ellie, since you invoked, I was going to comment, that's what Hannes and I were talking about here up front. I think what you're observing is the big lesson learned from the first BOF, which was there was appreciation around the use case of kind of software, but as we saw, a number of other entities said, but wait, this in fact may generalize. And I believe that the finesse that occurred on the mailing list after was those changes to the charter, which say we are absolutely going to cover software. But we're writing this in such a generic way that this is probably going to be reasonable for a lot of other applications. We did not know what the answer was for all of the next use cases. And so that perhaps is some of the conversation to have here. But as the charter is currently scoped, it's software, but things are written generically. So that is kind of a bit of the squint at the charter. Like, do you think it precludes things? And let's have the conversation about it.
Thanks. Philip.
Yeah, just responding to that, I think it's a terrible idea. And here's why. Software is completely different to everything else because you've got a massive amount of installed base. And if you want to do anything that makes any sense to software provenance, you have Git and you have software signing. And anything that you do has to bridge between the two if it's going to be of any use. Now, in my model of doing this, every user is a notary. All you have to do is to modify Git slightly so that instead of just putting a PGP signature in, you create a signature that is enrolled and interlocked to the individual developer's personal notary chain. And then that notary interlocks with every other through a bridge eventually. And so every user ends up being their own root of trust when they're evaluating notary claims. So the notary doesn't need to be a trusted party in this system. You can factor out that trust. You can't do that if you're talking about supply of baked beans. You can do it for software. And then when we look at how do you go to code signing, at the moment we have a really bad model for code signing. Well, every vendor seems to want to do it their own way. And we sign software distribution packages, not the code that runs on the machine. And we only do the final code, not every individual. My point here is that if you want to do something useful in software supply chain, it is a thing of itself that has unique advantages that you cannot apply to supply of baked beans, routers, or anything else. It's got to be considered separately. And you've got to interface with all that existing legacy infrastructure, or it'll be irrelevant.
Thanks, Philip. In response to that, I think what I hear is you agree that there's a problem, and Philip's shaking his head, nodding his head, sorry. And I think where the difference lies is more in the solution space. Of course, we will have hopefully plenty of time to discuss different solution spaces. I'm sure some of you have other ideas on how to do that, and we'd love to hear more about that. But I think it sort of like we are not there yet to really dig into the solutions. At least I'm not at this point. But it's definitely something that we should talk about in the future. And the other point on whether software is very different from hardware, point taken. And it's like others, obviously, like Monty, who just spoke right before you in the queue, thinks differently. So we'll have to hash this out as we look into specific use cases, which is also part of the architecture in terminology document. I think we need to look into this, see what is commonalities, where the differences are, and then figure this out. And if there's, let's assume there's no relationship between any of those, then we have a solution for software. It's for the community to decide, as Roman says correctly. Okay, Nalini, and the queue gets longer. Oh my God. Okay.
No, Nick, first, it's a very, very important problem. and definitely as a software vendor, I'm very, very interested. But a couple of clarifying things is like like the question of who is a notary and how do I say who a notary is very important. It's like certificate authorities. Can I just say I am now a notary and I will sign everything, I will attest? I mean, can I do that? And then like now, like CAs are like, you have to like, like CAs are defined in the OS and stuff like that, and Java Store. I mean, there's a bunch of details around that. Like, how is that? And I don't know, is that within the scope of the work?
So, and if I may try to respond to that, in general, like we would work on the protocols and the mechanisms that require interoperability. So if some environment says like everyone can do their own, roll their own, like you could be your own CA, like as I do for testing at the hackathon, I'm literally setting up my own CA, of course. You could do that too. Whether that will be then in a specific use case, then be acceptable to the other parties. I think that's a deployment consideration that, of course, architecture document may explore, but I think it's, from an interoperability point of view, it's less of an issue.
Okay, so, but I mean, at some point, someone needs to think about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. Yeah.
And another thing is, I'll stop talking, is so like, okay, for example, like we have software that uses Tomcat and then does commands maybe to the Linux OS. So within our software, do we need signed whatever it is for all these other things? And who exactly is signing them? Is it Linux Foundation signing on behalf of Linux or what?
So it also a good question. So there's other work that we definitely are going to reuse here. This is the whole debate about software bill of material in case of the software, where there's obviously lots of work on figuring out on who signs what, how does this work, how do the formats look like. So we would essentially stand on the shoulders of giants here who have done years of work on that space already. So we would reuse that, like we, as Hank said, we reuse other IETF work. Okay, Brendan, I'll have to get to the queue.
Okay, there. I'm sorry to bang on about this again with threat models, and I'm about to say some things that sound like I don't support this work, but I promise I do support this work. I just think that we need to be very specific about what we're doing, and I'm worried that right now we're not. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So if we take that original example that someone brought up a little while ago about taking a key that's trusted by the OS for one application and using it to sign another. I'd like to know how we see this solving that problem. I mean, there's an obvious way that we could look at it. And that means, when you go to install a piece of software, you have to, trace that particular software's signer back through the log and see if it changed. And then you can maybe make some decision. But the question is, do you really need that? Or can you just look at what the trust anchor for the previous key was? That you can do the same thing based on your own history. Then the only gain we get here is for brand new installations. So is that a goal of, is that what we're trying to solve? The second example is take SolarWinds, for example. Someone breaks into a build server and they legitimately sign a piece of broken code. This is, a deliberate attack, and they use the existing signing infrastructure to do it. So now I have to go back again and say, we've got supply chain, we've got a software bill of materials, we've got signatures, we've got notaries. How does it save us from this attack? I don't understand where this all fits in. And I just this is why I'm talking about threats and threat models. I want to see how all these pieces fit together so that I can understand how we're solving this problem, because I'm lost right now. I don't quite get it.
Brendan, I hear you a little bit that you would like to see almost like a separate threat model document in addition to what would otherwise go into an architecture to cover this thoroughly.
I think that, honestly, I think it's necessary because right now what I see is a bunch of security requirements with no justification and their advantages simply implied.
Okay.
Hannes, is it okay if I answer the part 2 of the question which Brandon has asked?
Actually, there's a long queue. You can, which I closed already, so you're a little late on that. Sorry about that.
I wanted to answer, not
if
the question.
there's time, we'll, yeah, but yeah, maybe we get to that. Chris.
Hi, Chris Nacio. I feel like there's a disconnect for some of the statements, and I'd like some refinement.
Closer to the microphone.
There's a disconnect from some of the statements, and I'd like some refinement in the charter about like identities. So it's kind of described as being out of scope, but then, you know, Cedric kind of mentioned that identities need to have endurance and long lasting, and so you can't just, you know, kind of issue a new identity and issue a new identity and issue a new identity. And there's no way to kind of manage or control that in the protocol, and it seems like a key foundation to it. So if there could be text added around what I think is kind of a big problem in what's there so far, that would help me out a lot, because otherwise I don't feel like we can make the assertions we want to make.
I'm just going to add there that maybe if you could propose some text, that might help. Maybe on list, or that would be appreciated.
Okay. So, all right. So it seems to me that software is different from real-world artifacts in that software you want to be immutable. You don't want it changed. Whereas if I buy my kid a gaming PC and he wants to upgrade his video card and then maybe sell the old one to somebody else, how do you handle that? The other thing is I want to know on the software side, how do I know if a bag of bits is software or a GIF of a bored ape? And does this enable that whole bad thing? So I'm concerned that this is, you know, we're trying to boil the ocean and merge too many separate things here, and that instead we're going to end up with, you know, NFTs is the only thing that really works. So I think it needs I think it needs more clarification and more refinement. I think the generalization is a really bad idea. You can't argue with me, Hank. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess, Dick, you are in the queue. But in response to that, I think we've heard on the mailing list and now here that some people are pro more than the software use case and others are focused on the software use case. And we will have a poll later on to figure out like where you guys are with regards to that question in general. And then we do what you guys want. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, Dick Brooks. You know, right now, software consumers have no trustworthy way to verify the software supply chain. They can't verify even the most simple things like this software signature on this software package is legitimate. There's a need, and someone's going to have to solve this. It doesn't exist today to have this verification function so that a consumer can go out and check that information and establish some level of trustworthiness. And I think we will have succeeded if we can get some greater visibility into these smart grid app stores, which collectively are the largest distribution point to software on the planet, commercial software. If we can get visibility for the consumers to be able to compare trust scores or compare something about trust, we will have given the community something useful.
Thank you. Cedric.
would like to make a couple of brief clarification. Is it okay, or should I leave room for questions? Can I make a couple of clarifications, or do you?
No, no,
okay,
you can ask whatever you want.
So the first one has to do with, so there were a couple of questions suggesting that a notary will be a central authority, and that deciding who gets to be the notary is super important, is central to architecture. And similarly with the question of software, like everyone should be their own notary if they want to sign their software. I would like to emphasize that the notary issues the counter signature, that's not the primary signature on claims. So the whole architecture supposes that issuers, typically software providers, developers, will sign their artifacts, and that's the primary signature, and they will be held accountable for that. What the notary provides is more like an administrative function. You are not going to accuse a notary of taking over the world. They just take the claims, check that they look okay superficially, then put that into the registry, and that's it. So that's not a source of authority. Like a CA, the notary has no way of issuing signed claims on behalf of anyone else in the system. Regarding identity, I don't think you have time to get into the details, but there is an interesting thread on the mailing list discussing what our approach is and some alternatives to it. Thanks.
I opened up the queue again, which I previously closed in worry that we wouldn't get through it in time. So Hank, Yogesh, and I think Cullen also wanted to get up there. So please do. Okay. Wei, are you in the room or remote?
Okay. First of all, I need to say I in favor of this work, but my concern is that this work may be too rely upon the supply chain, or I suggest recommend using the word supply chain as less as possible, because actually I feel this work shouldn't be bound to the supply chain. For example, the supply chain, the word supply chain appears 23 times in the charter, but it only appears 21 times in the architect draft, which is a 26-page draft. So so I think it's not really so related to or so rely upon the supply chain. Besides that, I feel this is solution is just like transparent statement tracking or service. So it's not appropriate to put the supply chain in the working group name. For example, we don't put supply chain in the RATS working group names, but the RATS remote attestation could be used to secure the supply chain in certain ways. Yeah, and in the charter, I saw in the goals, it says to standardize the overall security flows for securing the supply chain. But I think securing the supply chain involves a lot of non-technical points. So saying this may be too broad for the working group. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Wei. I hear you making a couple of points here. I think it would help the group if you could propose some text on the charter to use maybe terms, or also for the architecture document to use terms that you think are more appropriate in places where supply chain is maybe used too often. I think that would be helpful. Also, the working group name itself is something that is, of course, up for the group and for the ISG and so on to make. So yeah, we're I think totally up for that. So thanks for the feedback. Roy
Williams. So I wanted to make a few comments. So there's been a lot of discussion on the difference between the software and the hardware use cases and some of the other ones. There are probably half a dozen to a dozen that we know of use cases that we could walk through, but we were really focusing on, hey, let's just see if we can do a generic one to fill in some basic building blocks we have in general for this whole problem space. Some of the questions on how do I set myself up a notary? Well, what we're trying to define here is an interface for implementers to implement, and whether there's an instance you can install on in your own network, or there's a government one, or there's an industry one. Those are outside the reach of this. As to whether big companies like Microsoft or Google will stand up one, that's still too far in the future. The discussions on how to supply secure software and all the discussions in SBOMs, we kind of take out of here because there's already other groups working on some of the issues to deal with the requests from the US government around SBOMs. In Microsoft's case, we're signing our SBOMs and putting hashes of functions and talking about binding keys. That's not what this working group is about. This is about the building blocks we kind of need to transmit those things around. And when we talk about signatures of software, Microsoft signs every single binary we produce, but we don't sign the text files. And those signatures readily expire well before the product lifecycle ever exits. And that's why we were hoping for something like the Notary to transition that case. If you want to see how Microsoft does it today, you can read through the Authenticode specification, and you can tell we're not very happy with where some of the direction has gone in there.
Thanks. Thomas?
Yeah, I'll wear my MIT hat on. So I just want to say I'm very
Closer
much
to the microphone.
I'm very much in favor of this. 2 years ago, I pitched a bunch of presentations to the TCG. And this is 2 years ago. The slides are still up on the TCG website for those have access to it. And I kind of didn't get a listening because of many reasons, and that one being the lack of, I guess, software providers in the TCG. So it's great to see IETF do this. Related to this, I was involved, I've been following a thing called GSA Ties, for those who know what the Global Semiconductor Alliance is. They're doing it well. They're talking about the same thing-ish. It would be good if they would be made aware of this work, because they'll probably just use it. So that's another sort of audience that this group could talk to. Using a different hat, so on Tuesday there was a small company that was called 14bis that is doing supply chain for aircraft components. The CEO just texted me to say, look, could you say that they're in support also? And if this becomes a working group, they'll come and join.
Awesome, thanks. That's great to hear. Colin.
Colin Jakes. So I'm trying to work through like, hey, I mean, I believe we could build something like this. It has really a lot, every single stage of it is about as distributed and complicated as possible. It's a very complicated solution to this type of problem. But the thing that I'm trying to get my head around is, it seems like there's a lot of different players that need to deploy something for this to deploy in the real world. And it's not obvious to me what the incentives for each of them are to deploy. And I'm not saying there isn't, I'm just saying it's not obvious to me. Like, I'm having my hard time getting around that. So if anyone could sort of speak to like, look, these are the different actors we need to successfully deploy a complete solution, even though the IETF's only doing a small part of it. And these are the type of companies or operators that would do any of those. I think that would really help me better understand the likelihood of not us successfully writing some RFCs, but those successfully being used in the real world.
Is there anyone who could actually respond to that? Because I can't do that.
Hi, I'm Kay Williams. And
Closer to the microphone, you need to eat it.
Got it. All right. I'm Kay Williams. I am at Microsoft, and we will be implementing something that is based on SCITT and making that available as a commercial offering. Was there more to the question than that?
Yeah, I think what Cullen is asking is who are, and I'm going to try and see if I can restate your question a little, Cullen.
No, I think, Elliot, I think the question was like, or try it, give it a try.
Yeah, which let me try and restate it in this way. First of all, who are the minimum number of players for this architecture to succeed? Because Cullen is basically saying, you know, it's very complex. There are a lot of players. It seemed to me that the minimum number of players is really 3. You know, you have somebody who wants to assert a notarization. You have the notary, and you have somebody who wants to validate it. You could have others as well, but those seem to me to be the minimums. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I can, Mike Prorok here. I could talk to this a little bit, you know, working in different aspects of this. And we're primarily looking at this from, you know, validation of supply chains around machine learning and machine learning assets. And I think the three is kind of the simplest construct, right? You've got someone who's creating some kind of software that says, yep, this is me. Here's the stuff I produced. Let's get a signature on this, right? You've ultimately then getting that at the notary level, right? This third party that's recording that log, putting it in, you know, some kind of a notary style ledger, right? That's append only. And then you have this consumer side, right? I'm going to go look at this and decide, do I trust that notary? Do I trust the people that were making claims about it? And this is extremely in line with the kinds of software deployment stuff we have, right? When we're deploying something out open source, cool. Like it's kind of on the consumer side to go trust that, right? And they're going to trust whatever they see around that. Who are the authors? Who is involved? When I'm deploying something for a more secure environment, typically you'll have a third-party red team looking at this, right? And then taking their attestations and putting those things about that in some kind of a, right now, usually a big old pile of Word documents that they then hand to the customer who decides if they want to trust it. And so it's very, very similar to the exact model we have today. It's just simplifying it and allowing for automated checks around this stuff. And if we could do that in a standardized way, it would be extremely helpful across the board for a lot of different problems. But focusing on the software side as a starting place is good. It's clean, it's easy. You know, nothing is easy around this, but it's the easiest of the ways we can go tackle this problem.
Colin, did that help you in any way?
So I get probably what one side of Microsoft would be doing. Is Microsoft planning on running a notary service as well? So I see people nodding. So okay.
Okay.
Are there other people? Yeah.
Yeah, I can just say, I mean, if it's helpful for Microsoft, we're planning to be involved in a number of ways. So we will be providing information about initially our software that we make available to the public for consumption through a service such as this. And we're also looking at beyond software. We were listed just on the software side earlier, but we're looking at this much broader than software. We're looking at it also for our hardware products. Another way that we're looking at it is as a consumer of information from others. So we want to be able to gate the software and the hardware that comes to us. And we were looking at this as a solution where others can provide information that we consume. So we'll share with others, we'll request from others, and then we'll also provide services where you know, both Microsoft can use and others can use to stand up their own notary services.
Cool, thanks. Dick, I have to skip you because I'm worried that we won't get through the queue. Yaron, make it brief.
Yaron Chef.
Okay. Okay. Nice. Go ahead, Yaron.
We're using the term transparency, and we really mean immutable ledgers. I would urge the group to decouple the function of what you want out of this registry from the implementation. I think for some use cases, that transparency kind of thing is totally useless, specifically for internal enterprise registries. It's a waste of time and money. And I would claim that even in the big real world, certificate transparency has not been such a wonderful success, as opposed to, hey, Google just has a copy of each of the, you know, issued certificates. So again, some people might want those immutable ledgers, and that's fine, but I would suggest that the REST APIs, at least, or the interfaces, should not assume that.
Okay, that's a good point. Definitely in favor of separating the functionality from the implementation. I think that's in general what we do in the IETF. Next one, Chris from Remote.
Hi, yes. I just wanted to quickly respond to Yaron's comment. I do believe the context or the contents of the proposed charter and the documents that I've seen are written in such a way to allow that separation. So you could, for example, deploy something that was not like fully transparent for some definition of fully transparent with all the backing history and everything. Of course, you know, as we get deeper and deeper into the specs, we'll figure out if that's actually true. On Cullen's question with regards to who's interested in doing this stuff, we're interested in looking at this as sort of a successor to earlier binary like transparency systems on the web that provide more stronger guarantees for like browsers and other applications pulling down arbitrary code from untrusted contexts and making sure that they are safe. Earlier work, I just dropped a reference to it in the chat. It was this thing called Code Verify with Meta or WhatsApp, and there's a natural progression of that work to something like SCITT /SIGSTOR / whatever this the unification or convergence of these things happens to be. But I'm interested in experimenting with what is the successor to this initial thing for transparency-like solutions on the web. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for the link. Ori?
Hey, Ori Steele from Transmute. I just wanted to say, we're planning to implement a version of this, and we're interested in both sides from the slide earlier. So cyber physical supply chains, software supply chain, physical supply chain use cases. I believe, I agree with a lot of the framing that's happened on the mailing list around acknowledging that there are some generic building blocks here, and in particular, really leaning into COSI and the affordances that it has to solve these problems. And we're looking forward to implementing whatever comes of this work. Thanks.
Thanks for the support.
Hi, this is Hank. I'm currently not on the queue, but my mid-echo played fun with me here.
Okay, go for it.
I want to reply to Wei's comment. It's way back. Sorry for the pun. Rats can help, but I think we deliberately kept them out of the initial chartering. So that this was deliberate because we need to form the things we want to protect with authenticity and trustworthy proofs coming from rats first, and then find the nucleus where we attach them, because this is a very big space. And if we force everybody to rats, I mean, the issue of cell phone, whatever, that is too much. So, but we are thinking about that. So don't worry. It's not, we have it, it's in sight, but not in scope right now. And I also want to highlight back to Jeff, Jared's question about who wants to do this.
Microphone, go speak to the
Sorry. Who wants to do this? There was a list. I mean, Hannes projected that. He made a call on the list. Who wants to do this? And there, in the first day, 8 people said, yeah. So maybe that helps a little bit to reduce the concern here that people do not want to do this, because I heard Microsoft wants to do it, but that's nice. There are others, like a lot of others. So maybe that helps. Here we go.
Yeah, that was the feedback on the list. Yeah.
Hi, this is Sachin here. I just had a point about the previous one where the gentleman pointed out that key signing and everything is already being done in software and everyone can be a notary. My own point is that the challenge that I think this thing is trying to solve is the fact that there's a centralized transparency thing and the idea of the offline receipt that people can validate. I mean, those are key concepts that don't rely on every user actually knowing everything about what's going on, but I have a place where I can take this proof and just validate it and say it's okay, assuming that somebody have done due diligence, just the way that you go and buy a title to a house, where the title leasing company has actually done due diligence. So other than everybody trying to get the title of the house verified and validated, I have the central authority that says, okay, fine. And assume, let's say, some sort of, what you should say, responsibility for that. So I think that's one of the key things that we should point out, that is the.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out this specific requirement on offline validation. Of course, we will have to sort of go through some more collection of requirements and looking at the threads, etc., to see what other things need to be added. So that's, but good catch. Yeah.
Nalini Elkins. So now, first, don't get me wrong. I totally support this, but we're an independent software vendor and we have to do this. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to do it. And one of the things, it's like, it's great you've got people who want to do it, but a lot of the problem is going to be with the weakest link is the people who don't do it. And then that software gets embedded. The way my customers deal with it today is we have a contract. And in the contract is like, if you take our business down, we will take you down.
Yeah, that's definitely a good. And I think this aligns. Your comment aligns with what Colin has said, in the sense that looking at the incentives, understanding the incentives for everyone who participates in these type of things, these type of systems. At this stage, we are mostly concerned about, do you agree that there's a problem? Do we need to solve that problem? And is this the right place to solve the problem and to work on a solution? Like how the exact solution looks like, and who then obviously you can shape a solution in many different ways so that the responsibilities shift around. That's something for a future group, not at this stage yet, because we don't know exactly how the solution would look like. Okay, having said that, thank you so far. Thank you for the discussion. Now we go to an equally important part on sort of capturing your impression via the poll. Let me put up the questions. And I think we need to augment the questions on the generic versus software. Okay, I think we need to start with the problem statement one. And maybe, Roman, you can help me here a little bit. I think the question I think we should be asking is whether the problem statement is understood. Elliot, are you going to do the poll, or who is going to do that?
I'll do it. So the question is, you want it to say understood or clear? I think they're both synonymous, to be honest.
Yeah, pick whatever you want.
Okay, we're going to start the poll in just a moment for that question. And let's see here. You should now see this up. Excellent. And we'll give it just a minute. Numbers are still going up a bit. And still going up a little bit. We'll give it another 20, 30 seconds. Actually, yeah, just another few moments. Okay, I think it's pretty clear. Let me end the session here. Let's see here. So there are the results.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty clear that we have consensus, but it's rough that we understand the problem statement. Given that we had some folks talking that they did not understand it, that now would be a good time to come to the mic to help us all understand.
Of course, you can also post it to the list as well.
Oh, sorry.
Brent?
You already know what I'm going to say, but I'll say it again anyway. I don't understand which security problems we're solving, which specific security problems. I see security solutions in the problem statement, but I don't see the problems. So I don't understand the problem statement.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, and I have a similar concern in that there are lots of different problems in this space that we can solve and lots of different ways to solve them. I'm not quite sure exactly how the notary fits in those, in which ones we're going to solve with notary, how it fits in. Like, I'm missing that bigger picture, and maybe I have not, been involved in enough of the discussions to see that, but that's my concern right now.
So, Hank, you're next. I'm hoping you're going to address or attempt to address both Brendan's and Joe's point.
Yeah, I will try to. This is Hank. I will try to. So, yes, the problem statement is phrased this way that we can agree upon this in this session. That's sad. That said, I think Brandon is absolutely on track. They're inside of the chartering to some extent, and then in a working group document to a very large extent, we really have to lay out the threats. And that is called threat modeling. I'm not sure how popular I'm just right now with the IETF saying that, but this threat model thing really pays off because yeah, it really does. Sorry. And so yeah, part of the work is creation of that threat model. But I think initial chartering work would be categorizing that. And I think Brandon would be a huge help. Others too.
Okay. Yeah, but in other words, what you're saying, Hank, is like we have to keep when we wrote the problem statement, it had to be short, and so it couldn't capture everything. And there's obviously supplementary documentation that will go into the details. Okay.
Just one point of information. Somebody put in the chat that the results of the polls don't show up in the recording, so I'm just going to announce them here. Raise hand for, the question was, do you think the revised problem statement is clear? Raise hand was 56 people. Do not raise hand was 13 people, and participants were 69.
Dick, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Hannes. Dick Brooks. I'm willing to bet that every person in this room has experienced what it's like to go to an app store and not be able to tell which apps were trustworthy. You do a search, you get a result of a dozen. How do you know which of those is the most trustworthy? So my response to Brendan is, Brendan, we need to give consumers better insight into the software trustworthiness that is completely blind to us today. So what I think this group is doing is giving us the avenue, or at least the guys like Microsoft who are going to host the registries, and people like REA, which is a very small company, by the way, we're committing to. But we'll do it from the consumer side. We'll query Microsoft. We'll give them, here's the SHA-256 key hash, and here's the key identifier. Tell me if it's trustworthy. That's what I hope to see.
Okay. Dave, please keep it short. We need to raise another few questions.
God, I raised my hand that I think it's clear, but I think then Brendan asked a good question. I think the part that's irrelevant to, I think, the AD and knowing how to go forward is it clear enough that in other words, is the threats that Brendan is asking for, is it okay for those to go into, say, work of the working group to say, put it into the architecture document? Or is it something that needs to be known enough in the charter text? Okay, that's relevant to the BOF. Okay, I raised my hand saying I think it's clear enough that I think Cedric's presentation talked about it enough that I think putting it into the architecture document is sufficient for me. But I just want to clarify that's really the question of the working group, and what I think our AD would probably want to know is, is this something that affects the charter and the scope, or is this something that's just work for the working group?
Thanks, Dave. That's a good point. Okay. We want to bring up the next poll, which is the one about, should the charter be focused on the software supply chain use case, or should it be more generic right from the start? We can, like future, we can always do things later, but that's the question. How do I phrase that best? In Roman is giving it a try.
Should the charter be focused exclusively on SBOM? Yeah, should be focused exclusively on the software supply chain.
Okay, I have that ready to go. Any concerns with that?
No, go for it.
Okay. It's like a game show, huh? You have the next poll. People are if are invited to poll online. And yeah, this one's more interesting.
Jesus Christ, how we can make sense of it.
We'll give it just another moment and then we'll close the poll. Okay. Results are, should the charter be focused exclusively on the software supply chain? Raise hand was 27, do not raise hand was 44, total participants is 71. So I would say that, Roman, you have your work cut out for you as to how you want to interpret that.
Should we let them into the queue first? Yeah, should we let them in the queue?
Sure. That looks really rough. Let me think about that. Let's open the queue to talk about that result. We need a finessing question.
Yeah, quick
Very
clarification.
briefly, because
Yeah,
Go
quick
ahead,
clarification might be, would you still participate and engage and think the work is important, even if it was only limited to software? Because there are plenty of us working across multiple aspects of supply chain that still feel that it's very important this work moves forward regardless of how it's scoped initially.
Can you say that more slowly so we can figure out what?
Yeah, sorry, I'm at 0.7 acres. Would you still be willing to engage with the work and support the work, even if it were only scoped to software to start, right, as part of the charter?
Okay, Alyssa.
Alyssa Cooper, I agree the question wasn't clear. Sorry, Elliot. I think there's kind of two things to think about here. One is that it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. Like you can have this nice language that says you're going to prioritize software supply chain use cases, but make every endeavor to build generalizable building blocks that can be used for other use cases. And you can also say that to the extent that it bears on the actual design and architecture, that you can prioritize software-based use cases, but take the other ones in later after the core work to support software supply chain is completed. So I don't think it's really like black and white, and I think that's part of why you got a weird answer to the question.
So do you think, Alyssa, must and may might do the job there? Like must meet the needs of the software supply chain, may meet the needs of other use cases?
I mean, I'm not a super fan of using the normative keywords in charters, but it is like, that's the same concept. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to. You need to say that.
All right, we're going to run out of time if I let everyone kind of speak. We were primarily using this to catch some early feedback. I apologize. We're going to kind of cut it because I want to get the next question so we get a positive result from the BOF. So we're going to kind of say, we'll keep the queue as it is if you can kind of come back after we run the questions. Thanks.
So Roman, which question do you want to run next?
Yeah, I'm preparing the text.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to put the question in, and I'm going to send it to you in chat. Elliot, would you be willing to support the work if it was scoped to software to start?
Okay, I think what I heard was, yeah. Okay, ready, get set, go. And we're off to the races. And look at that. Okay, I think we're getting a very clear answer on that question. So last chance. And the results to that question were 69 raised their hands, 4 did not.
Good. So thank you for that question. I think we got some consensus and we finessed some of this specialization versus generalization kind of with that item. I think we want to talk about the energy questions.
the energy question, willingness to review documents. Elliot, can you phrase something according to that?
Yep.
Let's see who's actually engaged rather than being a tourist here on a first day.
Okay, here we go. Wow. This is going to be like the most, these are going to be like the most reviewed documents in history for the IETF.
I think I should write down.
I'm going to just end the session at this point. I think, Roman, you have your answer there pretty clearly. We have 57 people already who are willing to review. 11 said they're not willing to review, and there were a total of 68 participants.
The next question is sort of the step up, sort of beyond willingness to review. I actually willing to write the text. Elliot, can you
working on it? And here it comes.
Holy shit.
This is going to be like the editor co-author working group. Those would be great. Okay, so what's interesting is that there are 31 people at the moment who aren't willing, but there are 31 people who are, which is more than enough. Let me end the session.
Yeah, that's good enough. Thank you.
Okay. Next, what would be your preferred next question? We'll just move on the list.
So let's do the next question as we plan. Do you think about the charter from the slides?
Okay.
Basically, do you support the current charter as we discussed it?
Okay, here it comes. Testing everybody's pop-up window size on this question. All right, just another moment. Okay, and all right. On that question, there were 61 people who did raise their hand. There are 9 people who did not raise their hand. And just a reminder for people who are new to the IETF that we confirm things on mailing lists. And in particular, I would suggest that the 9 people who did not raise their hands, who had concerns, should definitely raise those on the mailing list. Which brings us to our last question. Are we ready for that?
But did the question just now also address our last one?
I think it does. From what I need, I mean, what it looks like we have here in the room is consensus to go with the charter we have. I do recognize we had some folks that did not support the charter. I don't know whether it's outright or in the form it has. Given kind of where we are with the clock, we can actually collect I mean, I do welcome those folks to come to the mic, but I think we are going to have to come to the mailing list because there may be an opportunity just to refine it a little bit more. But in broad strokes, I think we have something to move forward with the working group. But again, to the mic, if you are one of those kind of nine folks, or perhaps you didn't participate at all, that want to see a particular refinement. Thanks.
And I see. Thank you for the response. Not anymore. So. Yeah,
So then I would also say there were some folks in the mic line while we were trying to finesse these questions that we turned away just so we can continue kind of pushing for that to fit inside the time. If there's anyone that wants to kind of return back to the mic as well to make that comment, now is the time.
We have 5 more minutes if someone.
And while people are considering that, Roman, do you want to talk about what your process is for the next steps?
Yeah, great point. So my next process, given what I heard, which again, I'll repeat, is it looks like a strong consensus in this room to move forward with the charter we have in this forum is I would return back to the mailing list. We have quite a lot of activity there, so it's actually really nice to see that healthy discussion already. I would drop the text we have here with the reminder that of the results here about the level of interest, who's kind of what is interested in working on what, and I would give it a little time to collect more feedback. So probably next week after we all successfully travel home with no incidents, of course, I would probably give it around a 2-week call to see what we collect and whether that's going to be an opportunity to refine the text we have in some way or kind of change, change a little bit of kind of what we're thinking. So everyone that wants to say something concretely will have another opportunity. And we have some folks now at the mic, given my discussion of that.
Hi, Stu Card, Critical Technologies.
Say it again.
Stu Card, Critical Technologies. A potential place to draw the circle that's somewhere in between software only, which is still enough to be interesting, and arbitrary things like QR codes on parts trays in a factory might be things that can run software, including participation in cryptographic network protocols, and that at least occasionally have network connectivity.
Thank you. Yeah.
Philip?
Yeah, my problem with doing software as an example of something is that it is not a good example of parts. So for example, take GitHub. We've got a Microsoft person here. Say GitHub just started a Notary and automatically threw the apex of everybody's Git commits into a Notary chain, like transparent, and we do a Merkle tree over it. Structured cryptography is amazingly powerful. If you had that, people can then throw AIs at it and can analyze that data and can come out with really useful stuff on current risks today, even if nobody else deploys. And so when I start to look at the problem of software, there's so many low-hanging fruit that you can get that don't apply to anything else. And so that's the reason that I'm kind of like, I think that we should do software, but I don't want to be coming along here with a solution that is good for software, that is perfect for software, and then say, no, Phil, that's not going to work on brake pads. That's my problem. I think that software is sui generis, it's a thing of its own type, and you've got leverage there that you can't do anywhere else. You can't set an AI loose on brake pads and find out interesting stuff on them. You can have AIs look into software. So it's not the same.
Okay. I think we ran out of time. And I would like to, or we three, Elliot, Roman, and I would like to thank you for your participation and for the feedback you've provided. And we hope to see all of you again on the mailing list discussing the actual documents and the work. Right?
Yeah, I'll just add, sorry.
Elliot, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add congratulations to the proponents of the group who've been really working really hard, to the participants in the on the mailing list. Looks like there's very productive discussions, really important ones. So good job, everyone.
Yeah, and I'll close with my own kind of thank you. And I also wanted to thank the chairs who have been helping us facilitate since the first BOF and since the last BOF on the mailing list that got us here to this. So we'll see you on the mailing list. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for because I think